The crayon snapped in Emma's left hand, its waxy fragments scattering across the mahogany desk like broken teeth. Dr. Sarah Chen watched the 7-year-old girl stare at the red stub between her fingers, her pale face expressionless as carved marble. In 3 weeks of emergency sessions, this was the first time Emma had shown any reaction to anything. "It's okay," Sarah said softly, sliding a fresh box of crayons across the desk. "We have plenty more." Emma's dark eyes flicked up to meet Sarah's, and for a heartbeat, something ancient seemed to peer out from behind those childish features. Then the moment passed, and Emma selected a black crayon with the careful precision of a surgeon choosing a scalpel. The drawing that emerged was the same as all the others. Tall, impossibly thin figures with smooth, featureless faces stood in perfect formation around a bed. The sleeping figure beneath the covers was rendered in loving detail, every fold of the blanket, every strand of hair on the pillow. But the watchers remained blank voids where faces should be, their elongated limbs casting shadows that seemed to move even on the static page. "Who are they, Emma?" Sarah asked, though she knew the child wouldn't answer. In 3 weeks, Emma hadn't spoken a single word, not since the Millbrook Police Department found her sitting cross-legged in her family's basement, surrounded by dozens of these same drawings, while upstairs her parents and older brother lay dead in their beds. No signs of violence, no indication of struggle. The medical examiner's report read like a fairy tale. Cause of death undetermined. Subjects appeared to have died peacefully in their sleep. Emma set down the black crayon and reached for the red one. She began adding small X marks above each bed, directly over where the sleeping person's heart would be. Her left hand moved with fluid confidence, though her school records clearly indicated she was right-handed. Sarah had noticed this discrepancy in their first session, but hadn't pressed the issue. Trauma could manifest in countless ways. "Emma," Sarah tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you tell me about the people watching? The tall ones?" The crayon froze mid-stroke. Emma's head tilted slightly, like a bird listening to a distant sound. For several seconds, she remained perfectly still, and Sarah could hear nothing but the whisper of the ventilation system and the distant hum of traffic 15 floors below. Then, Emma's lips moved, forming silent words. Sarah leaned forward, straining to catch even a breath of sound. But Emma's mouth closed with an almost audible snap. The girl's right hand, which had been resting motionless on the desk, began to twitch. Emma stared down at it as if it belonged to someone else, her brow furrowing with what looked like confusion or fear. "The keepers," Emma whispered suddenly, her voice rusty from disuse. The words seemed to surprise her as much as they did Sarah. "They're called the Keepers." Sarah's pulse quickened. After weeks of silence, this was a breakthrough. She kept her voice carefully neutral, professional. "The Keepers? What do they keep, Emma?" But Emma had already retreated back into herself. She picked up the black crayon and began drawing a new figure in the corner of the paper. Smaller than the others, sitting on the floor with its back to the bed. Unlike the faceless watchers, this figure had features: long hair, small hands, a child's proportions. "Is that you?" Sarah asked gently. Emma's left hand continued moving while her right remained clenched in a trembling fist. She didn't look up when she spoke again, her voice so quiet Sarah had to lean across the desk to hear. "Ellie said you would ask about the drawings." The chill ran down Sarah's spine. "Who said that, Emma?" "The other children." Emma finally looked up, and her eyes held a clarity that was somehow more disturbing than her previous silence. "They told me you would want to understand. They told me to draw you a map." Sarah's mouth went dry. "What other children?" Emma smiled for the first time since Sarah had met her. It was not a child's smile. "The ones who are still awake." Sarah's hands shook as she spread the newspaper clippings across her kitchen table. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she couldn't bring herself to move away from the growing pile of evidence. Each article told the same impossible story. Peaceful deaths, no signs of struggle, surviving children who seemed different. Millbrook Gazette, March 15th. Local family found dead in apparent sleep-related incident. Millbrook Gazette, February 28th. Second family dies mysteriously in sleep. Regional Daily, January 22nd. Small town grapples with unexplained deaths. 17 people dead in 6 months. All in their beds, all appearing to have simply never woken up, and all leaving behind children who had been relocated across the state, scattered to different foster homes like seeds in the wind. Sarah reached for her laptop and began cross-referencing the children's names with foster care records. It took 3 hours and several ethical boundaries crossed, but she finally had what she was looking for: current addresses for 12 of the 15 surviving children. The first call was to Margaret Torres, a foster mother in Springfield. "Timothy? Oh, he's been through so much." Margaret's voice crackled through the phone. "Sweet boy, but he's had some adjustments. He used to be right-handed, but now he only uses his left. And the drawings? Lord, the drawings he makes." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of drawings?" "All people with no faces. Always the same thing. And he talks to his room at night. We can hear him whispering. But when we check on him, he's alone. Claims he's talking to his friends." The second call confirmed Sarah's growing suspicions, then the third. By the 10th call, she was no longer surprised by the responses. Changed-handedness, obsessive drawing, whispered conversations with empty spaces, and something else. Something the foster parents mentioned almost as an afterthought. The children all seemed to know things they shouldn't. Floor plans of houses they'd never visited. The names of neighbors they'd never met. The sleeping habits of perfect strangers. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Dr. Chen, this is Rebecca Martinez. I foster one of the Millbrook children. Can we meet? There's something you need to see." They met at a Denny's on the outskirts of Springfield. Rebecca Martinez was a tired-looking woman in her 50s, with graying hair and worry lines etched deep around her eyes. She slid a manila folder across the sticky table. "Lucy's been with us for 2 months," Rebecca said, her voice tight with anxiety. "She's 10 years old, lost her parents in February. Sweet kid mostly. But she's been drawing these." Sarah opened the folder, and her blood went cold. The drawings were architectural in their precision. Detailed floor plans, complete with measurements, furniture placement, and most disturbing of all, X marks indicating bed locations. But these weren't drawings of Lucy's foster home or any place a 10-year-old should know. "I recognized the layout," Rebecca continued. "It's the Hendersons' house, 3 blocks from where we live. I've been inside maybe twice for neighborhood barbecues, but Lucy, she's never been there." She drew the master bedroom exactly as it is, right down to the position of the nightstand. Sarah studied the drawing more closely. In the corner, rendered in the same black crayon Emma favored, were 3 tall, faceless figures standing around the bed. Small numbers were written next to each figure. Times: 11:47 p.m., 2:33 a.m., 4:15 a.m. Has Lucy ever mentioned these keepers? Rebecca's face went pale. "How do you know that name?" "She whispers it sometimes, when she thinks we can't hear. The keepers are coming. The keepers are watching. But we never told anyone what she says." Sarah felt the familiar chill creeping up her spine. "Rebecca, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Have you or your husband been having trouble sleeping lately? Any unusual dreams or feelings of being watched?" The woman's eyes widened. "How could you possibly?" "Yes, Tom's been complaining about insomnia for weeks. Says he feels like someone's standing in our bedroom at night, but when he turns on the lights, there's nothing there. I've been having the strangest dreams. People standing around our bed just watching. Sarah's mind raced. The children weren't just traumatized survivors. They were being used, transformed into something else, something that could map and track potential victims. "Mrs. Martinez," Sarah said urgently, "I think you and your husband are in danger. These children, I don't think they're drawing from memory. I think they're drawing instructions." Rebecca's face crumbled. Instructions for what? Before Sarah could answer, her phone rang. Emma's foster mother. "Dr. Chin, thank God. Something's happened. Emma's gone. We put her to bed 3 hours ago, but when we checked on her, the room was empty. The window was still locked from the inside. She just vanished." Sarah hung up and grabbed Rebecca's arm. "We need to leave, now." What's happening?" Sarah looked down at Lucy's drawings spread across the table. In the corner of each page, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, was a small figure with long hair watching from the shadows. Always watching, always learning. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "we're about to find out what the keepers really want." Sarah's apartment building felt different when she returned that night. The familiar lobby seemed too quiet, the elevator buttons cold beneath her fingers. As she rode to the 15th floor, she couldn't shake the feeling that the mirrored walls were reflecting more than just her own image. She'd spent the rest of the evening calling the other foster families, warning them to be vigilant, to watch their children closely. But with each conversation, the same pattern emerged. The children were slipping away. Not running, simply vanishing from locked rooms, disappearing from seemingly secure locations with no trace of how they'd gotten out, or how they'd gotten back in. Sarah fumbled with her keys at apartment 15C, her hands trembling from more than just caffeine. The hallway stretched in both directions, illuminated by fluorescent lights that seemed dimmer than usual. She could hear the familiar sounds of urban evening televisions murmuring behind closed doors, the distant hum of dishwashers, the occasional footstep on the floor above. But underneath it all was something else, a sound so subtle she almost convinced herself she was imagining it. The soft whisper of children's voices, just at the edge of hearing. Inside her apartment, Sarah double-locked the door and drew the curtains. She'd been experiencing insomnia for weeks, another symptom she was only now beginning to understand. How long had the keepers been watching her? How long had she been marked for collection? She settled at her desk with a cup of tea and opened her laptop, determined to find more information about the historical pattern Emma had mentioned. If this cycle repeated every 50 to 60 years, there should be records. There should be precedent. It took hours of searching through digitized newspaper archives and historical society documents, but she finally found it. The Millbrook Historical Society's website contained a brief mention of the town's founding, including a footnote that made Sarah's blood run cold. Millbrook was established in 1847 on the site of a Seneca village that had been mysteriously abandoned the previous winter. Local settlers reported finding the entire population dead in their dwellings, apparently having died peacefully in their sleep. Only the children survived, though they were described by missionary records as greatly changed. And speaking of tall guardians who protected the sleeping, the surviving children were adopted by settler families, but reports of unexplained sleep deaths followed them for several years before mysteriously ceasing. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. The pattern went back almost 200 years, generation after generation of children transformed into scouts and mappers for something ancient and patient. A soft tapping at her window made her freeze. She lived on the 15th floor. Sarah forced herself to turn toward the sound. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see a small hand pressed against the glass. Emma's face appeared in the window, pale and serene, her dark eyes reflecting the apartment's lamplight. "Hello, Dr. Chen," Emma said, her voice somehow audible through the glass. "May I come in?" Sarah's rational mind screamed that this was impossible. A child couldn't climb 15 stories. A child couldn't hover outside a window with no ledge, no fire escape, nothing to stand on. But Emma wasn't just a child anymore, was she? "How are you out there, Emma?" Sarah asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Emma tilted her head, that same bird-like gesture from their session. "The same way you've been feeling watched at night. The same way you've been having trouble sleeping. The keepers taught me to move the way they do." Sarah noticed that Emma was drawing on the glass with her finger, not leaving any marks, but going through the motions. The same floor plan, the same careful mapping. "Your apartment is beautiful," Emma continued conversationally. "Bedroom at the end of the hall, bed positioned against the north wall. You sleep on the left side, always. You read for exactly 23 minutes before trying to sleep, but lately you've been lying awake for hours. The keepers have been practicing with you." "Practicing what?" Emma's smile was no longer entirely human. "The collection process. They have to calibrate each person individually. Too fast and the subject wakes up and struggles. Too slow and the essence disperses. But you've been very cooperative, Dr. Chen. Your sleep patterns are almost ready." Sarah backed away from the window, her heart hammering. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Emma said softly. "The keepers want you. They chose you weeks ago, when you first started asking questions about the children. You've been so useful, gathering information, making connections. You helped them understand how much the outside world knows about their work." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Every call she'd made to foster families, every question she'd asked, every piece of research she'd conducted, she'd been providing intelligence, mapping the extent of outside knowledge about the keepers' operations. "You've been reporting back to them," Sarah whispered. "We all have," Emma confirmed. "Every child who survived Millbrook. We're all connected now, all part of their network. And soon, you will be too." Sarah heard the soft whisper of her apartment door opening behind her, though she was certain she'd locked it. She turned to see more children standing in her hallway, the other survivors from Millbrook, all of them moving with that same fluid, inhuman grace. Timothy from Springfield, Lucy from Rebecca's home, children she'd never met but somehow recognized from their foster parents' descriptions. They filed into her apartment silently, their eyes reflecting light like cat's eyes in the dark. "We've been watching you for weeks," Lucy said, her 10-year-old voice carrying an authority that belonged to something much older. "Learning your routines, your habits, your fears. The keepers needed detailed maps before they could begin the collection." Sarah realized with growing horror that every strange shadow she'd glimpsed, every feeling of being watched, every moment of inexplicable unease, the children had been there, studying her, preparing her. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. Emma pressed both hands against the window, and Sarah could hear the glass beginning to crack under some impossible pressure. "Now you sleep," Emma said gently, "and the keepers add you to their collection. Don't worry, Dr. Chen. It doesn't hurt, you just never wake up." The window shattered inward in a shower of glittering fragments, but not a single piece touched the children as they flowed into Sarah's apartment like smoke given form. Sarah ran. She bolted through her apartment toward the front door, but Timothy was already there, standing perfectly still in the doorway. His foster mother had been right. He only used his left hand now. In it, he held a piece of paper covered in Sarah's floor plan, complete with arrows indicating her likely escape routes, all of them blocked. "There's nowhere to go, Dr. Chin," Lucy said from behind her. "We've been mapping this building for weeks, every exit, every stairwell, every possible hiding place. The keepers are very thorough." Sarah spun around, looking for any way out. The children had positioned themselves throughout her apartment with military precision, but they weren't advancing. They were simply waiting. "Why?" Sarah demanded. "Why me? I'm nobody special. I'm just a psychologist." "You're the one who started connecting the patterns," Emma said, stepping through the broken window as if solid glass presented no barrier. Her bare feet didn't seem to notice the sharp fragments on the floor. "The one who began tracking the children across state lines. The keepers needed to understand how much the outside world suspected." Sarah felt a cold realization wash over her. This was all planned, from the moment I was assigned to Emma's case. "The keepers have been planning for a very long time," Timothy confirmed. "They don't just collect individuals, Dr. Chen. They collect communities, entire populations, taken one person at a time, so carefully that nobody notices until it's too late." Lucy moved to Sarah's desk and began spreading out papers. Not drawings this time, but maps. Real maps of the city, marked with hundreds of red X's. "Every X represents someone who's been prepared for collection," Lucy explained with the casual tone of a child showing off a school project. "The keepers have been working on this city for 18 months. Businessmen who live alone, elderly people in nursing homes, college students in dormitories, people who won't be immediately missed." Sarah stared at the maps in horror. There were hundreds of marks scattered across every neighborhood, every district. How many people? "This phase targets approximately 3,000 individuals," Emma answered. "The keepers work in waves. First the isolated ones, then family units, then community leaders. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, the social infrastructure has been too damaged to mount any resistance." The children began moving closer, forming a circle around Sarah. She noticed that their eyes all reflected light the same way now, a silver gleam that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside their skulls. "The process is really quite elegant," Timothy continued. "The collected individuals don't die, not exactly. They're preserved in a state between sleep and death, their life essence slowly harvested to feed the keepers. It can take decades to fully drain a person, which is why the keepers need so many." Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank into her desk chair. The magnitude of what she was hearing was overwhelming. "This isn't just about Millbrook. This is happening everywhere." "Every 50 to 60 years, in different locations," Lucy confirmed. "The keepers are ancient, Dr. Chen. They've been feeding this way for millennia. Humanity is simply their livestock." Emma approached Sarah's chair, her movements unnaturally fluid. "But you've created a problem for them. Your research, your phone calls, your questions. You've established connections between incidents that should have remained isolated. The keepers don't like their work being documented. Now they're gonna kill me to keep their secret." "Not kill," Emma corrected gently. "Transform. The keepers have realized they need agents in the adult world, people who can move freely, access information, redirect investigations. Children are excellent scouts, but they can't obtain medical records or police reports or academic research." The pieces clicked into place in Sarah's mind, each realization more horrifying than the last. "You want me to become like you, a part of their network?" "The process is different for adults," Timothy explained. "Instead of hollow out your mind and fill it with purpose, the keepers will let you keep your personality, your memories, your professional skills. You'll still be Dr. Sarah Chen, child psychologist. You'll still help traumatized children and write reports and attend conferences. But you'll also ensure that any research into unexplained deaths gets misdirected," Lucy added. "Any investigation into missing children gets closed. Any doctor who notices unusual patterns gets transferred to a different department. Emma reached out and placed her small hand on Sarah's shoulder. The touch was ice cold, and Sarah could feel something crawling under the child's skin, something that wasn't quite Emma anymore. "You'll be a guardian of their secret," Emma whispered. "And in return, the keepers will let you keep enough of yourself to remember what you've lost." Sarah looked around at the children surrounding her. These hollow-eyed scouts who had once been normal kids with normal lives. The thought of joining them, of becoming another puppet in the keeper's network, filled her with a desperate fury. What if I refuse? Emma's grip tightened on her shoulder, and Sarah could feel those crawling things under the girl's skin responding to some unspoken command. "Then you sleep," Emma said simply. "Tonight, peacefully. And your essence joins the collection while your body feeds the keepers for the next 40 years. Through her apartment's broken window, Sarah could see shapes moving in the darkness outside. Tall, impossibly thin figures with no faces, climbing the building's exterior walls like spiders. The keepers themselves, coming to claim their prize. Sarah closed her eyes and made her choice. "I accept," Sarah whispered. The children stepped back, their silver eyes gleaming with something that might have been satisfaction. Emma's grip loosened on Sarah's shoulder, but the cold remained, spreading through her body like ice water in her veins. "You've made the wise choice," Emma said, but there was something in her voice, a flicker of the little girl she used to be. "It doesn't hurt as much when you don't fight it." Sarah opened her eyes and looked directly at Emma. "How long have you been fighting it?" The question seemed to catch the child off guard. For just a moment, Emma's silver eyes flickered, and Sarah glimpsed something desperate trapped behind the alien gleam. "Every day," Emma whispered, so quietly that only Sarah could hear. "Every single day." Sarah nodded slowly, then reached for her laptop. The children watched warily as she began typing, but they didn't stop her. After all, she'd agreed to join them. What harm could she do now? "What are you doing?" Timothy asked. "Setting up the automatic uploads," Sarah replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "If I'm going to be part of your network, I need to make sure my research doesn't raise any red flags when I disappear for the transformation." She was lying, of course. Sarah had spent her career working with traumatized children, and she recognized the signs. The silver gleam in their eyes, the fluid movements, the adult knowledge. These children weren't willing collaborators. They were prisoners in their own bodies, conscious enough to know what was happening, but powerless to stop it. Emma was fighting, they all were. As Sarah typed, she began speaking to the children in the same gentle tone she used in therapy sessions. "You know, Emma, I've been thinking about what you said in our first session, about the keepers choosing me. But I don't think that's quite right." Emma tilted her head, confusion flickering across her features. "I think the keepers chose all of us," Sarah continued, still typing. "But choice implies consent, and none of you consented to this, did you?" "We serve willingly," Lucy said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No, you don't." Sarah finished typing and turned to face the children. "You're trapped, all of you. You can see what's happening, you can feel yourselves being used, but you can't stop it. That's not service, that's slavery." The silver gleam in Timothy's eyes wavered. "You don't understand. The keepers are ancient. They're powerful. We can't fight them." "Maybe not individually," Sarah agreed, "but what about together?" She hit the enter key, and her laptop screen filled with upload progress bars. Not research data being hidden, everything she'd discovered about the keepers, being simultaneously uploaded to news organizations, government databases, academic journals, and social media platforms across the globe. The children reacted as if they'd been physically struck. Lucy stumbled backward, clutching her head. Timothy let out a sound that was part scream, part sob. Emma's face contorted with pain as she fought against whatever was controlling her. "What have you done?" Emma gasped. "I've contaminated their process," Sarah said. "The Keeper's power comes from secrecy, from operating in shadows while their victims sleep. But I've made their existence public knowledge, every pattern, every connection, every detail about their feeding cycles. It's all being released simultaneously." Through the broken window, Sarah could hear something that sounded like the wind, but wind didn't scream. The Keepers themselves were reacting to the exposure, their carefully orchestrated harvest thrown into chaos. Emma's silver eyes flickered rapidly between alien control and human consciousness. In the moments when the little girl broke through, she looked at Sarah with desperate gratitude. They're pulling back," Emma said, her voice shifting between her own and something much older. "The exposure is forcing them to retreat, but they won't give up their collection." Sarah could feel it now, a cold presence pressing against the edges of her mind, trying to push its way inside, the transformation process, attempting to claim her despite the chaos. "I know," Sarah said calmly, "but maybe that's okay." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere in those buildings were 3,000 people marked for collection, going about their lives unaware of the danger stalking them. "Emma," Sarah said without turning around. "In our sessions, you kept drawing that small figure sitting apart from the others, the one watching from the corner. Was that really you?" "Yes," Emma whispered, and this time Sarah was certain it was the real Emma speaking. "Then you understand what I'm about to do." Sarah felt the cold presence surge into her mind, trying to hollow her out and fill her with alien purpose. But instead of fighting it, she did something unexpected. She let it in, but not completely. She became a battleground, allowing the Keeper's influence to establish a foothold while maintaining her own consciousness in a protected corner of her mind. The transformation was agonizing. Sarah felt her thoughts being sifted through, cataloged, reorganized. Her memories were accessed and cross-referenced. Her professional knowledge was absorbed and repurposed. But in the deepest part of her mind, in a space she'd learned to create during years of therapy training, Sarah remained herself. The children watched in amazement as Sarah's eyes began to gleam with silver light, but not the solid alien gleam they carried. Sarah's silver flickered, shifting between control and resistance. "You're fighting it," Timothy breathed. "We're fighting it," Sarah corrected. "All of us. The Keepers can control our bodies, but they can't completely erase our minds. Emma proved that when she tried to warn me. You all proved it by showing moments of your real selves." The cold presence in Sarah's mind recoiled, realizing it had been tricked, but it was too late. The connection was established, and through it, Sarah could feel the network of controlled children across the country. More importantly, she could feel them feeling her. For the first time in months, the surviving children of Millbrook weren't alone in their prisons. "What happens now?" Lucy asked, her own silver eyes beginning to flicker. Sarah smiled, and for a moment the expression was entirely her own. "Now we become something the Keepers never expected. We become guardians who actually guard." Through the broken window, the screaming wind was growing fainter as the Keepers retreated to whatever dark places they called home. The immediate harvest had been disrupted, the cycle broken. But Sarah knew they would return eventually. They were patient, and they'd been feeding this way for millennia. When they did return, however, they wouldn't find helpless victims waiting in their beds. They'd find watchers, protectors, a network of the transformed who remembered what it meant to be human. Sarah looked at Emma, whose small face was now flickering rapidly between silver control and desperate hope. "Ready to teach me how to draw maps?" Sarah asked. Emma smiled, her first genuine smile since the day her family died. "They're not maps, Dr. Chen," she said. "They're battle plans." 6 months later, Dr. Sarah Chen sat across from another traumatized child in another sterile office, watching him draw the same familiar figures, tall, faceless entities standing around a bed. But this time the drawing included something new. Smaller figures standing between the keepers and their intended victim. "Who were those?" Sarah asked gently, pointing to the protective figures. The boy looked up at her with eyes that held just the faintest glimmer of silver. "The ones who remember," he said quietly. "The ones who fight back." Sarah nodded and reached for her phone. She had calls to make, warnings to send, a network to maintain. The keepers were stirring again, testing new hunting grounds, but they would find their prey far from defenseless. In her desk drawer, hidden beneath stacks of case files, were dozens of drawings created by children across the country. Not maps for predators this time, but intelligence reports from an army of the transformed, who had learned to turn their prison into a fortress. The war between sleep and waking continued. But now the sleepers had guardians who would never rest.